The air was thick with the fetid stench of decay as I approached the Amazon facility. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the compound that seemed to twitch with the anticipation of nightfall. I checked my gear one last time, pump-action shotgun in hand, pistol holstered at my side, both fully loaded with the promise of destruction. The perimeter fence had been torn open, twisted metal gaping like the jaws of some giant beast. I stepped through, my boots crunching on broken glass and debris. Every sense was alert. I knew what awaited me inside weren't the people they used to be. They were something else now. Fast, ruthless, and driven by a hunger that was anything but human. As I moved silently through the outer yard, the first of them came into view. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, as it dragged one mutilated leg behind. I didn't hesitate. Raising my shotgun, I took aim and fired. The blast echoed off the facility walls, the creature's head exploding in a shower of gore that painted the concrete. One down, many more to go. I advanced steadily, navigating through a maze of shipping containers and equipment. The undead were scattered, some wandering aimlessly, others lying in wait. I encountered a pair next, lunging with startling speed. The shotgun roared twice more, stopping them mid-leap. Bodies hit the floor, limbs disjointed, a grotesque mixture of blood and viscera pooling beneath them. As I entered the main building, the true scale of the outbreak became apparent. The halls were chaos incarnate, blood smeared on walls, overturned furniture, and more of the infected. I pumped and fired, pumped and fired. The recoil, a familiar comfort. Heads burst, like ripe fruit denied the gentle touch of decay. I used my surroundings to funnel them into narrow passages, where their numbers meant nothing against the wide spread of my shotgun. Running low on shells, I switched to my pistol for the stragglers. Each shot was precise, conservation of ammo crucial in these moments. As I cleared room after room, the floor slick with the remnants of those I'd dispatched. The weight of what this place had become bore down on me. Yet, there was no time to dwell on the horror. Not when every corner turned could mean another wave of the damned. I reached the operations center, the door ajar. Inside, I hoped to find some answers, or at least a clue as to what had unleashed this nightmare. I stepped over a severed arm, fingers still twitching, its nails scraping against the tile, in a futile attempt to grasp at life. The room was a mess of papers, flashing monitors, and more bodies. Some had been shot, others not so lucky. I approached the main console, blood-smeared buttons blinking dimly. As I reached out, a low growl echoed from behind. I spun, pistol raised, just as another one of those things charged. It was close, too close, for the shotgun. The pistol barked, a bullet catching the creature in the throat. It stumbled, fell, then got up again. I fired twice more, shots tearing into its chest. It finally dropped, staying down, its chest a cavernous mess. Sweat dripped into my eyes as I turned back to the console, the screens now a welcome sight. Whatever answers this place held, I was ready to uncover them. But first, a moment to reload. To breathe. The night was far from over, and in the darkness of the Amazon, who knew how many more awaited their turn to fall by my hand? After securing the operations center and salvaging what I could from the scattered logs and data, I knew my next target had to be the lab. If there was any hope of understanding this plague, it would be buried deep in the heart of scientific research that birthed it. I reloaded my shotgun with a new set of rounds, Dragon's Breath. Stepping out of the operations center, the corridor stretched ominously before me, lights flickering, casting long, dancing shadows. The quiet was unnerving, broken only by the distant muffled sounds of shuffling and an occasional inhuman snarl. I gripped my shotgun tightly, the metal cold and reassuring against my palms. As I approached the lab sector, the resistance intensified. A group of the undead, more agile and aggressive than the ones I'd encountered outside, burst from a side passage. I didn't hesitate. A pull of the trigger and a stream of fire erupted, engulfing the narrow space. The dragon's breath lived up to its name, turning the corridor into a fiery gauntlet. Screams, more of anger than pain, filled the air as the creatures writhed and fell, their decayed flesh igniting like tinder. But I couldn't afford to slow down. The lab was close, and with every minute that passed, the risk of getting overwhelmed increased. I reached into my pack, pulling out a couple of homemade Molotov cocktails. I'd prepared them as a last resort, knowing that fire was a cleanser like no other. Rounding the corner to the main lab entrance, I was met with a barricade of bodies, both undead and, tragically, some of the original lab staff who hadn't made it out. They surged towards me, driven by whatever hellish instinct commanded them. I lit the rag of the first Molotov and hurled it into the crowd. The bottle shattered, spreading fire rapidly across the floor, walls, and bodies. The hallway lit up, a macabre bonfire of grotesque figures dancing in the infernal light. Behind the firewall I'd created, I reloaded and pushed forward, stepping over charred remains that cracked underfoot. The main lab door was ahead, reinforced glass showing signs of attempted entry, but it had held. I needed inside. Using the butt of my shotgun, I smashed the electronic keypad. The door wouldn't open normally now, but I wasn't looking for normal. I placed a small, controlled charge, a leftover piece of ordnance I always carried for emergencies, along the door frame. Stepping back, I detonated it, the explosion less about noise and more about pressure, popping the door from its hinges. Inside, the lab was a chaos of overturned experiments and flashing emergency lights. I needed data. Samples. Anything that might tell me how to stop the undead plague from spreading beyond this forsaken place. As I searched, the sound of groaning metal drew my attention. From the back of the lab, obscured by darkness and debris, another group of undead emerged. These looked different, covered in what looked like protective lab gear, but it hadn't saved them. I switched to my pistol, more maneuverable in the tight space, and moved to intercept them. Each shot had to count. I aimed for the head, the only sure way to put them down. One by one, they fell, until silence returned. In the lab's central console, I finally found it, a series of encrypted files marked with biohazard symbols and urgent warnings. Whatever this was, it was the epicenter of the outbreak. I copied the files onto my drive, preparing to take them back for analysis. As I prepared to leave, the building shuddered. A distant explosion, or something worse. Either way, my time was running out. I needed to finish this, once and for all, and get out before the whole place came down around me. The path to the core was clear, but what awaited me there, I could only imagine. The facility trembled again as I made my way deeper into its heart. Warning lights flashed a relentless red, casting an ominous glow that seemed to pulse with urgency. The encrypted files tucked securely in my pack might hold the key to stopping this nightmare. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. As I approached the central core, the source of the facility's power and, presumably, the epicenter of the outbreak, the sounds of the undead grew louder, more desperate. They knew, somehow, that their existence was threatened by my presence. I came upon a vast atrium, a massive open space that once buzzed with scientists and researchers, now a sprawling den of death. Hundreds of undead milled below, drawn by the noise of my approach. They filled the space, a grotesque mass of twisted limbs and gnashing teeth. This was it, the horde. I slung the flamethrower from my back, feeling its weight as a solid reminder of the task at hand. I knew its tank wouldn't last long, but it didn't need to. It just needed to last long enough. Taking a deep breath, I ignited the flamethrower, unleashing a torrent of fire into the crowd below. The flames roared like a wild beast, devouring everything in their path. The undead didn't scream, not really. But the sound of the inferno was punctuated by the crackling and popping of their desiccated flesh. I swept the stream of fire back and forth, creating a barrier between myself and the creatures, trying to reach the upper levels where I stood. The heat was intense, almost unbearable, even standing several feet above the carnage. Smoke billowed up, thick and acrid, filling the atrium with the stench of charred flesh. But as I had feared, the tank's gauge was rapidly dropping. I had mere minutes before it ran out. Using the last of the flames judiciously, I carved a path through the crowd, effectively splitting the horde and reducing the numbers I'd have to face head-on. With the flamethrower spent, I discarded it, switching back to my shotgun as I made my final descent into the core. The remaining undead, those not caught in the fiery purge, were disoriented, easier to dispatch as I made my way through the smoldering wreckage. The core room was just ahead, sealed by a massive steel door that showed signs of attempted entry. None of the creatures had made it through, but the security system was offline, making my job slightly easier. I used a manual override I'd picked up from a dead security guard, and the door groaned open, revealing the pulsing heart of the facility. Inside, amidst a tangle of wires and pulsing lights, was the central control console. It was here that I could initiate a complete shutdown, perhaps even trigger a containment protocol that would ensure nothing could escape the facility's confines. As I approached the console, I could hear the structure straining under the damage it had sustained. Time was running out. I quickly navigated the system, using administrator overrides found in the encrypted files. Alarms blared louder. A countdown initiated. With the containment process irreversibly engaged, I turned to leave, retracing my steps through the now eerily quiet atrium. The facility would hold, but I couldn't be here when it sealed permanently. Emerging into the fresh air outside, I watched from a safe distance as the facility's emergency protocols locked down. A final rumble echoing through the trees as the doors sealed and containment fields activated. Whatever was left inside would no longer pose a threat to the world outside. Exhausted, covered in soot and sweat, I made my way back to civilization, the encrypted files, my only companion. They held answers, perhaps even solutions. But for now, the immediate threat was contained, and that was enough. As the jungle reclaimed the silence, I knew my work was far from over. There were more monsters out there, more shadows to chase. But for today, the shadows had been held at bay. The distant echoes of the containment protocols faded into the dense jungle mist as I trudged away from the now sealed facility. My body was a map of bruises and burns, a testament to the hellish night. But it was over, for now. The monstrous horde that had overtaken the Amazon research station was contained. Buried beneath layers of concrete and steel, their undead whispers silenced. I paused at a ridge overlooking the valley, the facility a mere speck in the vast green expanse. It was hard to believe that such terror could exist in such a serene place. Yet, the horrors I had witnessed were real as the weight of the shotgun slung over my shoulder. As the adrenaline ebbed, exhaustion crept in, heavy and demanding. I knew I needed to find shelter and rest before I could make my way back to civilization. The encrypted files I carried with me held secrets, possibly cures or explanations that needed to be explored. But first, rest. I found an abandoned hunter's cabin just before nightfall, its wooden walls and rusted roof a welcome sight. Inside, it was dusty and smelled of old pine and forgotten summers. I secured the perimeter, set up basic traps, and finally allowed myself to collapse onto the musty cot. Sleep, however, was fitful. My dreams were haunted by fiery blasts and the groaning of the undead. I woke often, my hand reaching for the pistol I kept by my side. By dawn, I was on the move again, the encrypted files burning a hole in my pack. I needed to get them to someone who could make sense of them, someone who could use them to prevent another outbreak. The trek back to the nearest village was long and fraught with the sounds of the jungle, each snap of a twig a reminder of what I'd left behind. Once in the village, I made contact with my handler via an old, crackling radio. The voice that answered was crisp and formal, a stark contrast to the chaos I'd just survived. "Report more," the voice commanded. "It's contained," I replied, my voice gravelly with fatigue. "But we need to look at these files. There's something bigger going on here." "Understood. Extraction in 2 hours. Secure the data until then." "Roger that." I clicked off the radio and leaned back against the cool mud wall of the village communication hut. 2 hours to wait. 2 hours to keep the ghosts at bay. As I sat, the village life moved around me. Children played in the dirt, women washed clothes by the river, and men repaired nets for their next fishing trip. Life, unabated by the darkness I'd faced, continued. When the helicopter blades finally cut through the air that afternoon, I was ready. I handed off the encrypted files to a suit-clad agent who didn't bother with thanks. That wasn't what I was here for, anyway. I was just the hunter, the one who kept the shadows at bay. As the chopper lifted off, carrying me away from the jungle and back towards a world oblivious to the night's terrors, I watched the canopy shrink below me. The mission was over, but the war against the darkness, it was never ending. Monsters lurked everywhere, in the deep sea, the thick jungle, even hidden in plain sight. But I would be ready. As long as the night called, I would answer. It was my curse, my burden, my life as a monster hunter.